Where am I? Andrew groaned as his vision started to clear. He was lying on a cold, metallic floor in a dimly lit room that hummed with an unfamiliar energy. The last thing he remembered was patrolling near the outer edge of the solar system, scanning for signs of a passing comet. Then, a burst of light, blinding, unnatural, engulfed his ship. He pushed himself up, his limbs heavy and sluggish. Around him, the room slowly came into focus. Smooth, seamless walls that curved upward into a high ceiling. Panels flickering with symbols he didn't recognize. A faint mist hovered near the floor, cooling his bare skin. Andrew touched his wrist instinctively, but his communicator was gone. His uniform was replaced by a simple gray jumpsuit. A voice startled him. "You're awake." Andrew turned sharply. Across the room stood another man, stocky and dark-haired, his jumpsuit identical. He looked like he'd been through a rough time, his beard unkempt and his left eye swollen. He held a metal container, sipping from it warily. "You're human," Andrew said, the relief evident in his voice. "That I am," the man replied, his tone flat. "Name's Paul. Found you passed out about an hour ago. Figured you might need this when you came to." He tossed a bottle of water toward Andrew, who caught it with both hands. Andrew uncapped the bottle and took a long drink. "What is this place?" "Some kind of alien ship," Paul said. "I've been here a couple weeks now. Haven't seen a single window or anything that gives me a clue where we are. Just these strange rooms, cold floors, and those damn whispering sounds." "Whispering?" Paul nodded grimly. "At night, or whatever they call night. It's like voices, but you can't tell what they're saying. Doesn't matter how far you go. They're always there." Andrew sat down, the bottle still in hand. "How did you get here?" "Same as you, I bet. I was on a transport out near the Kuiper Belt. Next thing I know, I'm blinded by this blue light and then, bam, I'm here. I've run into a couple other guys since I woke up, but they've all been taken somewhere else. I'm the only one left." Andrew furrowed his brow. "What do they want with us?" Paul shrugged. "No idea. They're keeping their distance so far. Maybe observing, maybe waiting. I haven't exactly had a sit-down chat with them." Andrew stood, pacing the room. "We have to find a way out. There's no way I'm staying here any longer than I have to." Paul chuckled without humor. "Yeah, sure. Let's just find the nearest exit and wave goodbye. Trust me, I've tried. These walls don't exactly have doors in the usual sense, and when they do, they only open when they decide to." Before Andrew could respond, the room shuddered slightly. A faint hum grew louder, and the smooth wall on one side began to dissolve into a transparent barrier. Beyond it stood a tall, sinewy figure with elongated limbs and a face partially obscured by a shimmering veil. Two smaller figures stood behind it, each carrying what looked like curved metallic rods. "Guess they've decided it's time for you to meet them," Paul said, stepping back. Andrew squared his shoulders. "What do they do?" "Depends. Sometimes they just stare at you. Sometimes they ask questions, well, more like they think questions at you. Sometimes they stick you with needles." "That's comforting," Andrew muttered. The tall alien stepped through the barrier, its movements fluid and deliberate. Its translucent skin caught the faint light, revealing delicate networks of veins and luminous blue streaks that pulsed like glowing rivers. It regarded Andrew and Paul with an unreadable expression, if it had one at all. Andrew met its gaze, refusing to look away. "What do you want from us?" he asked firmly. The alien tilted its head slightly, the blue streaks on its body pulsing in a slow rhythm. Its thoughts entered Andrew's mind not as words, but as impressions, curiosity, analysis, and a faint trace of condescension. Paul whispered, "Just keep calm. Don't give them a reason to mess with you." But Andrew stepped forward, the tension in his shoulders evident. "You've brought us here against our will. What do you want from us? Answers? Experiments? Or are you just going to keep staring at us until we drop dead from boredom?" Paul winced. "Bold move, pal." The alien raised one of its slender arms, and the rods carried by its companions began to hum. Andrew flinched but held his ground. The humming stopped, and the alien turned its attention to Paul. Its gaze lingered for a moment before it stepped back through the barrier, which reformed behind it like liquid glass hardening into steel. Did that mean something? Andrew asked. Paul shrugged. Could mean anything. Could mean nothing. I just know they're watching, always watching. Andrew crossed his arms. Then we'll have to watch back. Paul raised an eyebrow. And what good will that do? Andrew smiled faintly. You never know what you might learn when you pay attention. Paul shook his head, but a hint of a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Well, you're the optimist. Fine. Let's see where this goes. The two of them settled into the cold, metallic space, their eyes now trained on the strange, flickering panels. For Andrew, the feeling of being trapped didn't fade, but having someone else there, someone to share the silence and the uncertainty, gave him a reason to keep thinking, keep planning. Somewhere outside their room, the hum of the ship's engines continued, and the faint whispers Paul had described drifted through the walls like echoes of an unseen, unknowable presence. Chapter 2. The Alien Mediator. Great, Paul muttered, leaning against the wall. We have company again. Andrew turned from the flickering panels as the barrier wall at the room's far end shimmered and faded away. In stepped a different alien from the ones that had come before. This one was taller, slender but not frail, with an elegant, feline-like frame. Silver fur caught the faint light, shimmering as if coated in liquid moonlight. She walked with calm, deliberate steps, carrying a small, flat device. Another one, Andrew whispered to Paul. But not like the others. Paul squinted. I don't like this. Feels calculated. The alien stopped a few feet away from the two men. Her luminous, almond-shaped eyes scanned them, first Paul and then Andrew, before settling on the latter. You're different from the others, she said in a voice that was soft yet resonant. Andrew frowned. How do you know that? I've studied the recordings, the alien replied. I am Latha, a coalition diplomat assigned as your cultural mediator. My task is to understand you and your people. Andrew exchanged a glance with Paul. You mean to figure out how to control us? Latha's gaze didn't waver. To learn. To communicate. Your resistance is intriguing. We assumed humans were pliable. Pliable? Paul barked a laugh. Lady, you clearly haven't met the right humans. Latha tilted her head, the movement graceful. That is why I am here. You will speak with me. In time, perhaps I will understand. Understand what? Andrew asked. Your strength. Your adaptability. Why you do not break as we expected. Andrew squared his shoulders. We're not here to be your experiment. We didn't sign up for this. You're treating us like test subjects. Latha blinked, the glow in her eyes dimming briefly. I see. Perhaps a demonstration of trust is in order. A gesture of good faith. She extended the flat device in her hand, and after a moment it projected a three-dimensional image into the air. The image showed Earth vivid, rotating slowly in the dark expanse of space. Andrew and Paul both froze, their breaths catching as they took in the familiar sight. Your home, Latha said. We have studied its geography, its climates, its many diverse cultures. It is unlike anything we have encountered before. Studied it? Andrew asked, his voice tight. Or plan to exploit it? Latha lowered the device. My role is not exploitation. It is understanding. Your people are unique. That is why the Concord brought you here. To learn from you. Paul snorted. Funny way to show it, snatching us out of space and locking us up in here. Latha's expression remained unreadable. We believed it was the most efficient method. Efficient, Andrew repeated bitterly. How about ethical? Ever heard of that word? Latha tilted her head again, her tail curling slightly behind her. We understand ethics, but we prioritize outcomes. However, I'm here to listen. To learn what you consider right or wrong. To understand your perspective. Andrew stepped closer. Then start by letting us go. Latha didn't move. I am not authorized to release you. My function is to communicate, not to command. Paul muttered under his breath, great. Another bureaucrat. But Andrew noticed something in Latha's demeanor, a flicker of something almost human in her posture, the way her ears twitched slightly when he spoke. You don't seem like the others, he said slowly. Why are you really here? Latha regarded him for a long moment. I am here because you intrigue me. Your resistance, your defiance, these traits were not anticipated. I wish to understand them. Andrew met her glowing gaze. Understanding isn't just about observation. It's about conversation. If you want to understand humans, you'll need to start treating us like equals. Paul muttered, good luck with that. Latha's tail swayed behind her as she considered Andrew's words. Perhaps you were correct. Very well. I will speak with you as equals. But I cannot guarantee the Concord will change its approach. Andrew folded his arms. Then why are you here? If they won't listen to what you learn, what's the point? Latha's expression softened just barely. Perhaps there is more to learn than I anticipated. The barrier began to reform as Latha stepped back. I will return, she said. We will speak again. As the wall solidified once more, Paul shook his head. Another one trying to figure us out. What's the angle here, Andrew? I don't know, Andrew admitted. But I think she's different. And if she's willing to talk, maybe we can find a way out of this. Paul chuckled dryly. Sure. Let's have a nice heart-to-heart chat and see if they just let us walk out the door. Andrew glanced at the now solid barrier. If she's really here to understand us, we might have a chance. We just need to make sure she learns the right things. Paul sighed and leaned back against the wall. Fine. You keep talking to her. But if she tries to pull any stunts, don't say I didn't warn you. Andrew nodded, his mind already racing. Latha's appearance wasn't just another test. It was an opportunity. If they played it right, maybe, just maybe, they'd find their way out of this alien labyrinth. Chapter 3, Cracks in the Concord. You sure this is a good idea? Paul whispered, crouching beside Andrew behind one of the glowing panels. Andrew peered over the edge of the console, watching the two Nerak guards just beyond the doorway. We won't know until we try. Paul glanced at the wires Andrew was carefully extracting. So you're saying you're going to hotwire an alien console with no idea what it'll actually do? Exactly, Andrew said. Stay low. Paul rolled his eyes. Fantastic. The soft hum of the Nerak's conversation filtered into the room, a rhythmic exchange of clicks and guttural sounds. They hadn't noticed the two humans working in the shadows yet. Andrew's fingers found purchase on a thin filament, pulling it free. A flicker ran through the panel, and a faint, translucent screen popped up above it. Strange symbols swirled and rotated. Paul frowned at the alien display. What the hell does that mean? Probably error, Andrew muttered. Or don't touch that. The screen's colors shifted, and suddenly an overhead light dimmed. The Nerak's clicks grew more rapid. One of them turned toward the door, its elongated limbs twitching in agitation. Great, Paul hissed. Now we've got their attention. Not yet, Andrew said, typing furiously on the console's panel. The symbols changed again, this time revealing a spinning icon that glowed a deep blue. Before either man could react, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor. The guards froze, then straightened their posture as Latha entered the room. What is happening here? She asked, her smooth, resonant voice cutting through the air. The Nerak exchanged quick glances. One let out a series of clicks and pointed at the panel Andrew had been tampering with. Latha's silver eyes narrowed slightly. She approached the console, her tail swaying with quiet menace. Step away from the device, she said, her voice low and controlled. Paul glanced at Andrew. This is your show. Andrew hesitated, then rose slowly, his hands held out. We didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't mean to interfere with a critical system? Latha's tone was sharp, but her eyes betrayed a glimmer of curiosity. Explain. Andrew chose his words carefully. We're trying to understand this place. We've been kept in the dark, literally and figuratively, since the moment we were taken. It's not easy being cooperative when no one tells you anything. Latha regarded him for a long moment. Her tail flicked once, then twice, before she gestured for the Nerak guards to step aside. Very well. I will allow a question. Ask and I will answer as I am able. Paul smirked. Oh, now we're playing 20 questions. Shut up, Paul, Andrew muttered. He turned back to Latha. What's really going on here? Why were we taken, and what do you want from us? Latha exhaled softly, her luminous skin dimming for a moment. You were brought here because the Concord identified potential in your kind. Humans are unpredictable. Our research requires understanding that unpredictability. Your strength lies in the unexpected. The Concord wishes to know if that can be utilized. Utilized? Paul repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. That's code for exploited. Andrew kept his focus on Latha. You said you're here to understand us. Do you agree with what they're doing? Her ears twitched. My role is not to judge. It is to learn. That's not an answer, Andrew pressed. Do you think this is right? Latha hesitated. Her silver gaze drifted to the console, the blue glow reflecting off her smooth, feline features. I think your kind is more complicated than we anticipated. That is why I continue to engage with you. Andrew glanced at Paul, who raised an eyebrow. She's dodging, Paul said. I am acknowledging complexity, Latha corrected, her voice firm. But that complexity does not change the fact that you are here. My purpose is to bridge understanding. If you wish for more cooperation, you must also cooperate. Andrew folded his arms. Trust is a two-way street. So far, all we've seen are closed doors and guarded secrets. You want us to play along? Start being honest. Latha met his gaze, unblinking. What would you have me reveal that you do not already suspect? Andrew took a slow breath. Tell us how we get out of here. Tell us why we should trust you. Because right now, it's looking like we're just experiments to you. Her tail curled behind her, the only sign of tension in her otherwise calm demeanor. I cannot open the doors for you. But I can assure you that not everyone in the Concord views you as experiments. Some of us believe you are worth more than data. I have said all I can for now. Before Andrew could respond, the Nirak made another series of clicks. Latha nodded once and stepped back toward the door. I will return, she said. Continue to reflect on your actions. I will listen to what you have to say next time. The barrier reformed behind her, leaving the two men alone once more. Great, Paul said, slumping against the wall. So now what? We keep fiddling with alien consoles and hoping we don't get fried. Andrew stared at the panel, the faint blue light still flickering. We keep trying. She said there's more than just data at stake. Maybe we can use that. We just need to figure out how. Paul shook his head, a wry grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. You've got some wild ideas, Andrew. Fine. I'll go along with it for now. But if we get vaporized, it's on you. Andrew smirked. Noted. Let's get back to work. Chapter 4, Learning to Trust. Paul ran a hand over his face, his frustration evident. You sure about this? Working with her doesn't exactly scream trustworthy. Andrew tapped a finger against the console they had been experimenting with. She's the only one who's actually talked to us. That's more than the others have done. She talks, sure, Paul said. But what has she actually given us? A few vague answers, maybe. Not a real way out. Andrew shrugged. It's more than we had yesterday. The barrier shimmered open again and Latha stepped inside. She carried the same flat device as before, the alien characters scrolling across it. Her silver eyes moved between the two men. Have you considered my offer? She asked without preamble. Paul folded his arms. What offer? You keep showing up and giving us cryptic hints, but we're still stuck in here. Andrew held up a hand. What he means is we need more than conversation. If you want cooperation, you'll have to trust us a little. Latha tilted her head, her ears flicking. Trust must be earned. Right, Paul said, rolling his eyes. And you've done such a great job earning ours. Andrew ignored him. How about you show us the Concord side of things? Let us see what's really going on. If you do that, we'll know you're serious. Latha's tail twitched. You ask for much. Transparency is not a luxury we often extend. And yet you want us to be open with you, Andrew countered. See the issue? She hesitated, then finally inclined her head. Very well. I will grant you limited access to our records. In return, you will share more about your species. Not just facts, but experiences, emotions, cultural nuances. Paul smirked. Oh, sure. We'll just hand over the secrets to Earth's best barbecue recipes. Andrew shot him a look. Fine. We'll tell you what we can. But it goes both ways. Latha stepped closer, her movements graceful yet deliberate. She placed the flat device on the console and a series of images and text appeared. They looked like reports, diagrams, and what appeared to be surveillance footage. Andrew leaned in, his eyes narrowing. What's all this? Records of human activity, Latha said. We have observed your species for some time. These documents detail your conflicts, achievements, and social dynamics. Paul pointed to a section of the screen. Is that footage of Earth? How long have you been watching us? Latha's tail swayed. Long enough to understand your potential, but also your unpredictability. Andrew frowned, scrolling through the images. And you think this justifies abducting us? It is not my place to justify, Latha said. I am here to facilitate understanding. That includes acknowledging our own actions. Paul muttered, what a convenient non-answer. Andrew shook his head. Look, if we're going to work together, you need to give us more than this. What's the endgame? What does the Concord really want from humanity? Latha met his gaze, her silver eyes steady. Adaptation. Growth. The Concord seeks to enhance itself through the qualities that make your species unique. But there are disagreements. Let's not rely on force or coercion. Andrew studied her, his expression unreadable. You said trust has to be earned. If you really mean that, then show us how we can trust you. Latha hesitated, then tapped a sequence on her device. A map of the alien ship appeared, complete with corridors, rooms, and symbols. Paul whistled. Is that your immediate surroundings? Latha confirmed. I cannot grant you full access, but I can provide you with knowledge of your environment. It is a start. Andrew glanced at Paul, who raised an eyebrow. It's something, Andrew said. Latha watched them carefully. If you wish to leave this place, you will need my help. But that help requires trust. This is what I offer now. If you continue to cooperate, I may offer more. Paul rubbed his temples. I don't know, Andrew. She's still holding the keys. Andrew turned to Latha. If we follow through, will you eventually let us go? Latha's expression was unreadable. If we reach mutual understanding, that is not outside the realm of possibility. Paul grumbled under his breath, but Andrew extended a hand toward Latha. All right, we'll try it your way. For now. Latha's gaze lingered on his hand before she stepped back, leaving the room once again. The barrier reformed behind her. Paul shook his head. We're really going to trust her? We're going to see where this goes, Andrew replied, his eyes on the map. If she's serious, this might be our way out. If she's not, then we'll figure out another plan. Paul sighed. You've got a lot more faith than I do. Fine. But I'm not holding my breath. Andrew smirked. That's why I'm the optimist, Paul. Someone's gotta be. The two men turned their attention to the map, their minds already racing with possibilities. Chapter 5. The Concord's Secrets. Paul traced the holographic map with his finger. So this is the big secret? A bunch of corridors and locked doors. Andrew shook his head. This is just the layout. The real secrets are what's behind those doors. Latha stood at the edge of the room, her expression calm as she watched them examine the projection. It is a start. Understanding your surroundings will help you navigate. And you will need that knowledge to learn what you seek. Paul muttered. You always have to make it sound so mysterious. Latha ignored him. As I mentioned before, the Concord's intentions are not singular. There are factions within our collective. Some believe humanity's traits should be integrated. Others see you as a resource. It is up to you to show them another path. Andrew folded his arms. And how exactly are we supposed to do that from inside a cell? By demonstrating your capability, Latha said. The Concord values results. If you can prove you are more valuable as equals than as subjects, that may shift the balance. Paul laughed dryly. Yeah, sure. Let's just prove ourselves to our captors. That'll fix everything. Andrew ignored Paul's sarcasm. You keep saying we need to show them something. What, exactly? Latha hesitated, her tail curling slightly. Innovation. Strategy. You claim to be adaptable. Show them you can adapt to this environment and make it your own. Paul raised an eyebrow. You want us to act like we run this place? Latha tilted her head. In a manner of speaking, take control where you can. Find ways to improve your situation. The more you assert yourselves, the more difficult it becomes for the Concord to see you as mere subjects. Andrew's mind raced. You mean turn the tables? Use their own tools against them. Latha gave a subtle nod. Precisely. Paul looked skeptical. And you're just going to let us do that? I will not stop you, Latha said. But I also cannot openly support you. What you choose to do is your own decision. Andrew looked at the map again, studying the marked rooms and passageways. This is the engine room, he said, pointing to a cluster of symbols. If we could gain access, we might be able to disrupt their systems. Force them to negotiate. Paul frowned. You think they'll negotiate? These are the same people who dragged us out of space and locked us up. They're not exactly reasonable. They might be if the alternative is losing control, Andrew said. Latha stepped closer. You will need more than just plans. The Concord systems are highly complex. If you attempt to bypass them without understanding their intricacies, you will fail. Andrew turned to her. Then help us understand. Her silver eyes flicked to the projection. I can offer guidance, but only up to a point. If you wish to learn more, you must do so on your own. Paul threw up his hands. Why am I not surprised? She gives us a taste and then says, figure it out yourself. Andrew ignored him. Show us how to read the system diagrams. If we can interpret these schematics, we'll have a better chance. Latha approached the console, her fingers moving gracefully over the interface. The holographic display shifted, revealing intricate layers of alien technology. This is the core routing system, she explained. These lines indicate energy flow. Disrupting this point, she gestured to a glowing node, would disable certain subsystems, but it would also alert security. You must act carefully. Paul leaned closer. So we just cut the right wire and they come running. Brilliant. Andrew gave him a sharp look. It's not about cutting wires. It's about finding the pressure points. If we can manipulate their systems without tripping alarms, we can control the situation. Latha stepped back, letting them study the display. The Concorde expects resistance. What they do not expect is calculated resistance. You have the ability to surprise them. Use it. Paul crossed his arms. Sure. And if it all goes south, we're the ones getting vaporized. Andrew nodded, his expression thoughtful. Then we don't let it go south. We play it smart. Paul's sarcasm faded slightly as he watched Andrew's determination. You're serious about this, aren't you? Andrew looked at the map one more time, then at Latha. If this is our best shot, we take it. And we'll need all the help we can get. Latha met his gaze. I have given you what I can. The rest is up to you. Paul sighed. Well, I didn't sign up for a space heist, but I guess we're doing this. Andrew grinned faintly. You always said you wanted to see what's behind the locked doors. Yeah, well, I didn't mean breaking and entering, Paul muttered. But he stepped closer, studying the schematics alongside Andrew. Latha watched them quietly, her tail swaying as they planned their next move. For the first time, Andrew felt like they had a direction, one that didn't just rely on waiting for the next interrogation. Now it was a matter of choosing their steps carefully. Chapter 6, The Great Escape. You really think this is going to work? Paul whispered, peering over Andrew's shoulder as he adjusted the panel's controls. It's not about thinking, Paul, Andrew replied, his hands moving quickly across the alien interface. It's about doing. Besides, we don't have another option. Behind them, Latha stood silently, her silver eyes fixed on the door. Her fur rippled slightly, a subtle indication of her unease. You need to move quickly. The longer you take, the more likely they will notice the fluctuations. Andrew nodded, ignoring the sweat beading on his forehead. The stolen schematics had given them just enough insight to reroute the ship's energy grid, creating a temporary blind spot in the Concorde's security systems. But the window would be brief, and if they miscalculated even slightly, they'd be caught before they made it out of the cell block. Paul tapped Andrew's arm. You're sure you know what you're doing? Nope, Andrew said, not looking up. But I'm doing it anyway. Latha stepped closer. There's a patrol scheduled in 10 minutes. If you're not through that door by then. We'll be through, Andrew interrupted, his fingers flying over the console. Just keep watch. Paul shook his head. You're awfully confident for a guy who's making it up as he goes. Andrew smirked. Confidence is all we've got left. With a final press of his palm against the glowing interface, the panel's light shifted to green. The door in front of them hissed and slid open, revealing a long, dim corridor. Go, Latha urged. Paul moved first, glancing around as he stepped into the hallway. Andrew followed close behind, with Latha bringing up the rear. The corridor was eerily quiet, the hum of the ship's systems the only sound. Which way? Paul asked, his voice low. Left, Latha said. Then through the maintenance hatch at the end. From there, you'll reach the auxiliary shuttle bay. Andrew paused, glancing back at her. You're not coming with us? She shook her head. I can't. My absence will be noticed. If I go with you now, I'll compromise your escape. Paul snorted. Great. So we're on our own. You won't be on your own, Latha said. I've left instructions. Follow them and you'll have a chance. Andrew hesitated, then gave her a small nod. Thanks, Latha. Her ears twitched and she turned quickly, disappearing back down the corridor. Paul let out a breath. Well, that's that. Let's move. They moved quickly but cautiously, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the few patrols they encountered. The schematics Latha had provided proved invaluable, guiding them past locked doors and through hidden maintenance passages. At one point, they had to duck into a narrow crawl space as a group of Nirak guards passed by. Paul muttered under his breath, "I feel like a rat in a maze." Andrew whispered back, "Just keep moving. We're close." Finally, they emerged into a large chamber filled with sleek, alien vessels. The auxiliary shuttle bay was dimly lit with only a few guards stationed at the far end. Paul whistled softly. "That's a lot of hardware." "Pick one and let's go," Andrew said, scanning the bay for the smallest, least conspicuous craft. They chose a compact shuttle tucked away in a corner, its design simple and utilitarian. Paul climbed in first, quickly familiarizing himself with the controls while Andrew kept watch. "How's it looking?" Andrew asked. "Not as complicated as I thought," Paul replied, flipping switches and watching as the console lit up. "But we'll see if it actually flies." Andrew climbed aboard, sealing the hatch behind him. "Make it fly. That's all we need." The shuttle hummed to life, the engine's low vibration filling the cabin. Andrew strapped himself in, his hands tightening on the armrests. "Any chance we can do this quietly?" Paul shook his head. "Not a chance. Hold on." The shuttle lifted off the bay floor, hovering for a moment before Paul guided it toward the exit. The sudden movement triggered an alarm, and the guards at the far end of the bay started shouting. "Here we go," Paul muttered, punching the throttle. The shuttle shot forward, narrowly missing a closing blast door. The ship shook as they broke free from the bay, entering open space. Andrew checked the rear monitor. "We've got company." A pair of Concorde patrol ships appeared behind them, their sleek forms closing in fast. "Of course we do," Paul grumbled, pushing the shuttle's engines to maximum. Andrew's fingers flew over the weapons panel, activating a set of small defensive systems. "Think we can outrun them?" "We don't have a choice," Paul said. "Hang on." The shuttle weaved through a dense asteroid field, Paul's piloting skills keeping them one step ahead of their pursuers. Andrew worked to jam the enemy's targeting systems, his focus narrowing to the console in front of him. "We've got an opening," Paul said, pointing to a wide gap between the asteroids. "If we can just make it through it." A bright flash lit up the cockpit as one of the Concorde ships exploded. Andrew stared at the screen. "Did we do that?" Paul laughed. "Looks like their own weapons backfired." "I'll take it." The second ship hesitated, then broke off pursuit. Paul steered the shuttle into open space, leaving the asteroid field behind. Andrew let out a long breath. "We did it." Paul smirked. "Yeah. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're alive." "I'll take that." They sat in silence for a moment, the shuttle's hum the only sound. Andrew finally turned to Paul. "Think Latha will be okay?" Paul shrugged. "She knew the risks. She's tough." Andrew nodded, staring out at the stars. "Yeah, she is." Paul gave him a sidelong glance. "What now?" Andrew smiled faintly. "Now we figure out our next move." Chapter 7, A Fragile Alliance. Andrew leaned back in the co-pilot's seat, letting out a heavy sigh. "How long until we're out of their patrol range?" Paul glanced at the navigation console. "A few hours if we keep the engines running at full burn. Should be clear once we hit the nebula's edge." Andrew nodded, staring out the viewport at the swirling pink and purple haze of the nebula they were passing through. "Think we'll be able to trust the next aliens we run into?" Paul smirked. "Do we have a choice?" Andrew didn't answer right away. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, which was still damp with sweat from the frantic escape. "We've been running on luck so far. Sooner or later, we need more than just a series of close calls." "Then we figure something out," Paul said. "One step at a time." Andrew looked over at him. "You say that, but we're floating in a stolen alien shuttle with a handful of supplies, no clear destination, and a galactic coalition probably hunting us down. Not exactly a promising start." Paul shrugged. "Sure. But we're still here. I say that counts for something." The shuttle's console beeped, drawing their attention. Andrew leaned forward, scanning the readout. "We've got something incoming." Paul frowned. "Another patrol?" "No," Andrew said, studying the display. "It's a single craft. Small, not Concorde tech." Paul tapped a few controls, bringing the ship into a gentle deceleration. "What kind of craft? Is it armed?" Andrew shook his head. "Doesn't look like it. But it's heading straight for us." "Friendly or not?" Paul muttered. "Guess we'll find out." The two men exchanged a glance as the unknown ship approached. It was a sleek vessel, much smaller than their shuttle, with an angular, almost insect-like design. Its engines flared briefly before it matched their trajectory, settling into a formation alongside them. A voice crackled over the shuttle's comm system. "You look like you've been through a fight. Need some help?" Andrew and Paul froze. The voice was smooth, calm, and distinctly alien. Andrew hit the reply button. "Who's asking?" There was a brief pause before the voice responded. Just a friendly passerby. You're not exactly in a friendly part of space. Name's Raycon. What happened to you two? Paul raised an eyebrow. What do you think, Andrew? He doesn't sound like a bounty hunter. Andrew frowned, his hand hovering over the comm switch. We don't know who he is. For all we know, he's part of the Concorde trying a different approach. Raycon's voice cut in again. Look, if you don't want help, just say so. But if you're in trouble, I can give you a safe port. No strings attached. Paul shrugged. We could use a safe place to rest. And if it's a trap, we'll deal with it. Andrew hesitated, then spoke into the comm. What kind of safe port are we talking about? Independent station, Raycon replied. No Concorde ties, no questions asked. I help keep the place running, and I don't care where you came from as long as you don't cause trouble. Andrew leaned back, glancing at Paul. Sounds too good to be true. Or it's our only chance to get some breathing room, Paul said. You pick. Either we trust him for now, or we keep floating and hope we don't run into another patrol. Andrew sighed, then turned back to the console. All right, Raycon. Lead the way. The alien ship shifted its course, and the shuttle followed. Raycon transmitted a set of coordinates, guiding them toward a cluster of asteroids that gradually came into view. Nestled among them was a small, nondescript station, its exterior patched together from what looked like scavenged materials. As they approached, Raycon's voice came through again. Docking Bay 3. I'll meet you inside. Paul set the shuttle down gently, the landing struts scraping against the makeshift dock. The two men exchanged a glance, then grabbed their gear and headed for the airlock. They were greeted by Raycon as soon as they stepped off the ramp. He was a tall, lean figure with smooth, emerald-hued skin and a face framed by delicate, chitin-like ridges. His golden eyes glimmered with interest. Well, you two look like you've been through hell, Raycon said, smiling faintly. Paul shrugged. Something like that. Andrew was more reserved. You said this place is independent? Completely, Raycon replied. We keep off the Concorde's radar. No allegiance, no affiliations. Just a place for travelers to regroup, repair, and resupply. Andrew glanced around. The station's interior was cramped but bustling with activity. Various alien species moved through the halls, bartering goods and swapping stories. The air was thick with the scent of machinery and exotic spices. You're free to stay as long as you need, Raycon said. Just don't bring trouble to my door. Fair enough. Andrew nodded slowly. Fair enough. Paul gave Raycon a skeptical look. Why help us? You don't know us. For all you know, we could be bringing that trouble you're worried about. Raycon tilted his head. Maybe, but you don't look like Concorde agents. And sometimes helping someone out comes back around. Call it a gamble. Andrew extended a hand. Thanks, Raycon. We'll try not to be a problem. Raycon shook his hand, his grip firm. You've got your docking berth and basic access to the station. Anything beyond that we'll need to talk. But for now, make yourselves at home. Andrew and Paul exchanged a look, then followed Raycon into the heart of the station. For the first time since their escape, they had a moment to regroup and consider their next steps. Chapter 8, Breaking the Chain. The dim, flickering lights of the station's central hub cast long shadows over the curved walls. Andrew leaned against a battered bulkhead, scanning a map of the station's interconnected systems on a small tablet. Beside him, Paul rubbed the back of his neck, looking over the same map. So, Paul said, this is it, huh? The big plan. Andrew tapped the screen, highlighting a series of linked nodes. These are the main power relays. We cut the right ones, and the Concorde loses their hold on this sector. No more reinforcements, no more surveillance. Paul frowned. And that won't bring their whole fleet down on us? Andrew shook his head. It's not about destroying anything, just isolating it. If the Concorde can't control this sector, it might force them to back off. Give the independents here some breathing room. Sure. And we're doing this because? Paul let the question hang. Andrew glanced over at him. Because they didn't just take us. They've been taking people, humans, other species, using them like pawns. If we can shut down their local grid, it sends a message. Paul smirked. I think they got the message when we stole their shuttle and bolted. Not the right message, Andrew replied. That just made us fugitives. This is a way to make them rethink how they operate. Him play angles. We might be his convenient excuse to stir up trouble. Or maybe he just sees what's coming, Andrew said. Either way, we don't have to trust him completely. We just have to trust that he wants the same thing we do, at least for now. Paul sighed. Fine. So, what's the play? Andrew zoomed in on the map. We split up. I'll hit the main relay hub. You'll handle the backup station. Both have to go offline at the same time or they'll reroute power and lock us out. Great. So no pressure, Paul said, shaking his head. You'll do fine. Andrew's tone was firm but not unkind. We've pulled off worse. Paul muttered under his breath, but he grabbed the gear bag at his feet. Yeah. Let's get this over with. They made their way through the station's winding corridors, passing clusters of aliens who glanced at them warily. Raycon had kept his word so far, no Concord patrols, no questions. But the station's residents clearly weren't used to seeing two humans moving with such purpose. When they reached the first checkpoint, Paul stopped. This is my stop, right? Andrew nodded. Backup station's down that corridor. Keep an eye on the time. We need to cut the relays simultaneously. Paul gave a mock salute. Aye, Captain. Try not to get caught. Andrew smirked. Same to you. As Paul disappeared into the shadows, Andrew continued toward the relay hub. The corridors grew quieter, the distant hum of the station's engines the only sound. When he reached the heavy, reinforced door that marked his destination, he pulled a small, alien device from his pack and held it to the lock. A few seconds later, the door slid open with a faint hiss. Inside, the relay hub was a sprawling tangle of conduits and control panels. Pulsing lines of light ran along the walls, converging at a central console. Andrew quickly scanned the room, making sure he was alone, then moved to the console and began typing. On his comm, Paul's voice crackled in. I'm in position. You good on your end? Andrew tapped his earpiece. Almost there. Stand by. He worked quickly, inputting the override codes Raycon had provided. The central console's lights shifted from green to yellow, indicating it was ready for shutdown. Okay, Andrew said. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, now. The console dimmed as he executed the command. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, a low vibration ran through the floor. Backup's down, Paul said. Main relays offline, Andrew confirmed. Time to go. As he turned to leave, the room's lighting shifted again. Red strobes began flashing, and an alarm blared through the station. Andrew, Paul said, we've got a problem. I see it, Andrew replied. He bolted for the door, his heart racing. You're closer to the shuttle. Get there and start it up. What about you? I'll be right behind you, Andrew said. Just go. The corridors were a blur as Andrew ran, the alarm ringing in his ears. He rounded a corner and skidded to a halt as a group of Concord soldiers emerged from a side passage. Great, he muttered. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Andrew dove behind a stack of crates. He reached for the small energy pistol he'd taken from their stolen shuttle, firing off a few shots to keep the soldiers at bay. Paul, he called into his comm, I'm pinned down. Start the engines and hold tight. Got it, Paul replied. Andrew's mind raced. He had to find a way past the soldiers without leading them straight to the shuttle. Spotting a maintenance hatch nearby, he made a split-second decision. He fired one more shot to keep the soldiers ducking, then sprinted for the hatch. The soldiers shouted, their footsteps pounding after him, but he threw himself through the narrow opening and slammed the panel shut behind him. In the tight crawl space, Andrew pushed forward, his breaths coming in quick gasps. He could still hear the soldiers searching the area, but he knew he had a chance if he stayed ahead of them. Finally, he emerged into an empty corridor that led directly to the docking bay. The shuttle's engines were humming, and as he sprinted toward it, the hatch opened to reveal Paul waving him in. Took you long enough, Paul said, pulling Andrew aboard. Just fly, Andrew said, collapsing into the co-pilot seat. Paul didn't argue. He punched the controls and the shuttle lifted off. As they sped away from the station, Andrew glanced at the rear monitor. The station's lights were dim, the relays they'd taken down still offline. Think we made a difference? Paul asked. Andrew watched the fading station. We'll find out soon enough.